this demonstration, we're going to show you how to get group functions working on business object. And specifically, what we want to show on this page is the average salary of all those employees. Now, those employees come from a business object that we have over here, and you can see in the data, we have the salary field for this. But because you can't directly execute SQL, it might be a little tricky to get the average. So I'm going to show you how you can do it with business rule and business and object functions. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to do it on this object. I'm going to create a separate dummy object. So call it dummy. And on this object, I'm going to mark it as containing application setup data, and I'm going to insert a single row. That's because when you execute object functions, they need to be on a specific row. By having that row in here with the ID 1 and marking it as part of the setup data, I know that when I import this application to other location, it's going to be there. All right, now let's create our object function. Create a new object function. We'll call it average sal, for example. Okay. And over here, you need to code in Groovy. I'm going to paste my code over here, and I'm going to explain what we're doing here. We're getting a pointer to a view called employees. This is this business object, and we're assigning it to this VO variable. Then I'm using println to print the maximum of the ID from this VO. Okay, and I'm returning the average of salary from this VO. So because I'm returning, I should mark this as a function that returns something, for example, a double. It can also, by the way, have parameters that you pass in, and you can mark this also to be callable from external system. So make sure that you have a green indication over here so you don't have any issues in your code. And that's just an example of the type of functions you can have in here. Once you create a function, it should be available for you over here as part of the endpoints that you can invoke. Note that this is a post operation. All right, so now let's go back to our page and let's invoke this when we enter the page. So we're going to take an event. We'll take the VB enter event into the page, and we'll create a new action chain, fetch average, for example, as a name. And then over here, we're going to invoke our REST endpoint. So again, under dummy, we have this function, the post operation, and you can see that you need to pass in a dummy ID. That's an ID of one of the rows in your business object. So I know there's a row called 1, so I'm going to put here the value 1 and assign it to the dummy ID. So now that we are invoking it, we want to return it into a variable on the page. So let's go back to our page and we'll take this. We can see we got an error here. We'll handle this in a second. We want this to be assigned to a variable. So let's create a variable, call it, for example, average salary, and make it a number variable. Okay, go back to our action chain. Okay, so one key thing in calling the REST endpoint here is you need to pass in the proper content type. And that's not just application JSON. It's actually need to be application/vnd.oracle.adf.action plus JSON. And so make sure to have that one in your content type over here. Okay. And then over here, we're going to assign the value that is returned from this function. The result is going to be assigned to the average salary. Let's go back to our page and we can see the average salary showing up over here. I wanted to show you also in terms of debugging this code, you have the logs area over here and you can enable logging on business object. And then if you hit refresh, you would see the logs. You can see the log here is 10, and that's because, remember, we fetched the maximum ID, and we printed it, and it would show up here. So that's how you debug business logic that you write in business object. So one more thing I wanted to show you is how to add a reference line here to indicate what is the average salary in this chart. So if you look at the chart and you'll go into the samples in the JET cookbook, there is a sample for reference object, and it explains how to do this. It would involve probably you reading some documentation on the OJ chart and specifically about the y-axis, okay, that has a reference objects array. Okay, so if you read this, you will see that reference object is an array that has those properties in an object in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my variables. I'm going to define a new type, call it a custom type. We'll call it refline. It's an object. And then we'll add fields. One of them would be the value. That would be a number. Another one would be the type. That would be a string. And you can add others, again, based on the documentation that you're seeing over here, such as color, for example. So let's go back here and add another field, call it color. Okay, so we have this refline type. Now we're going to define a variable, which again needs to be an array. So we'll call it reflines, and we'll mark it as an array. And the type of this is going to be our refline type. All right, so now we have this thing. But we're going to do it in our fetching of the data. So we have the action chain. We did an assign variable. We got the average into the average salary. Now we can also get it into the ref lines. So take the same returned value, put it as the value of our ref line. Let's set the type to be a line, and the color we can do, for example, green, like that. All right. So now we set this in the variable. What we have left to do is inside our chart, look up the property called y-axis. You can see there are details for the y-axis, and one of the details over here would be reference object, and we want to map it to our ref lines. Okay, and now you can see the green line indicating the average showing up over here.